Welcome back to Uncovering Real Estate, brought to you by the Brampton Real Estate Board. Before the break, we were speaking to Mark about residential tenancy. Mark, you brought up some prudent measures in terms of, how a landlord can find a good tenant. And it's interesting that in today's day and age, you can do a lot more than is maybe even necessary in order to find a right tenant. You were talking about an example of, maybe visiting a person in their current dwellings. Is that something that a lot of people are starting to do now, a lot of landlords are starting to do now?
Yes, a lot of landlords will in fact visit tenants where they live today because, again, it says a lot about a tenant. The tenant can say one thing, but when you see where they live and how they live, that's really important. Some landlords, will, for example, will check the car when the tenant drives up. How do you treat your own car?
Yeah.
Is it a mess? That may be how you treat the property once you move in. So, there's a lot of little things that landlords can do. A lot of, they'll talk to the tenants. Like even the questions you ask a tenant are very important. Like I'm a big believer in just asking open-ended questions like, tell me about yourself. And this way the tenant may volunteer some things about them that will help you to make your decision one way or the other. So it's important to ask the right questions and look at the tenant when you're talking to them. A lot of people say that just the way the tenant acts. For example, some tenants will not look you in the eye, they'll fidget, they will change the subject. And so these are all sort of behaviors that maybe you should be watching to say, maybe I better, be a little bit more careful.
Interesting. Mark, this conversation takes me back to some of my younger days, without giving too much of my age away. When I graduated from university, I got my first job and I was looking for places. Generally, a lot of landlords actually did ask me, hey, did you just graduate? Is this your first job? And to be honest, as a person looking to rent, I found the process quite frustrating. But from the other end, I'm guessing it is imperative for them to know that the financial security is there, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, like today, for example, tenants, when landlords are unsure, it is allowed, for example, for a tenant to offer more than first and last month's rent as a sign of good faith. So if they say to the landlord, you know what, I know you're only allowed to ask for first and last, but I'm going to offer you an extra 2 months up front just to show you that I'm a good credit risk, that I have money. That's legal in Ontario if the tenant offers, and that can help a tenant overcome perhaps that, you've never rented before, I'm not sure, etc., to help sort of assure the landlord that you're going to be a good tenant who's going to look after their property.
Mark, I'll take a cue from you. You mentioned credit checks and background checks. Are these incumbent on a person looking to rent, or are these incumbent on the landlord?
Well, in my opinion, look, you don't have to, but I think if you do these checks,
right,
it's very important. Now, so if you're a landlord, for example, and you're looking to rent a unit, let's say on Kijiji, my favorite 6 words are, we do credit and background checks. Because if you put that in your ad, you will probably discourage about 50% of applicants who don't want you asking those questions. So then you know at least that the people who are contacting you don't mind, doing the credit check or the background check as part of your due diligence.
Okay. And most renters themselves can also have that information ready to give a landlord in such scenarios, if
That's
I'm not
right.
mistaken.
You can get a credit report. People can get it a bunch of stuff. It's not that expensive, maybe $20, $25. And that's always, again, it's another sign. If you're trying to make your story, especially if it's a good building and you really want to get in there, you want to make a good story for your landlord.
Okay. So Mark, shifting gears, off camera I was talking to you a little bit about some of my situations, some of my experiences, and I find this is quite relevant to a lot of people, especially young couples, moving into the city. Brampton is home to lots of new immigrants, so a lot of people rent. The notion of post-dated checks. Now, if I understand correctly, is it a mandatory thing to have post-dated checks?
No, I happen to believe some people like to pay by email.
Yeah.
Email transfer, pre-authorized transfer.
Payments,
so they pay by email, and you're sure the money's in your account every month. A tenant has an obligation to make sure the landlord has the payment by the first of the month. Let's say they put in the lease, the tenant will provide 12 post-dated checks. What did I say when we first started? You can't put anything in the lease that violates the Act. The Act doesn't permit the landlord to demand post-dated checks. So even if you agreed to provide them, you could say to the landlord, I'm sorry, I changed my mind, but you will have payment on the first of every month. So there, a lot of tenants aren't aware of that. A landlord cannot demand this, even if it was in the lease. But what you have to do is make sure the landlord has the payment, wherever they are, by the first of the month.
That's really interesting. So in the process of a hypothetical negotiation, if a landlord asks for that, the tenant is well in his right to say, I'm sorry, the law doesn't permit that?
Let's see, here we're coming back.
Common
you
sense.
Say, so we're coming back to, do you really want to upset the landlord to the point where he's going to say, this guy's a troublemaker, or this girl's a troublemaker, she's already quoting laws to me, maybe I better rent to somebody else. So you see, there's sometimes, what's the problem, in giving these checks or making these payment arrangements? Again, you want to try to get the apartment. You really want to get the unit. You don't want to get into a war, because then the landlord's thinking, oh my God, this person's going to be taking me to courts no matter what happens, so I don't want to deal with this kind of person.
Right. So it's probably maybe something beneficial, maybe in terms of if it's an ongoing thing. 3 years you've established a relationship with your landlord, and then you say, hey, Rick, for the sake of it, I'd like to change the way we do this. I'd like to just send you payments electronically.
Right, and really a tenant can do this anytime. So maybe the answer is, you know what, why don't we try the electronic payment once? And you'll see that the money is right in your account. It's guaranteed. Like, it's not like a check that you have to wait till it clears. Why don't we try it once? And you'll see how simple this is, and then maybe we can move to that. So maybe that might be a way to start that conversation with a landlord.
Mark, these are some fantastic tips you're giving to many of our viewers who I'm sure are renters and landlords themselves. After we come back from the break, I'm going to shift the conversation more towards rules of eviction. But stay tuned, folks. We'll be back on Uncovering Real Estate, presented by the Brampton Real Estate Board. We have some great conversations with Mark still left.